The wisdom is right now is that housing prices are probably the lowest they're going to be in a while.
Hello and welcome to Change and the Market, your mindful guide to the ever-changing real estate world. My name is Peyton Beck here at Masiello HQ, and with me, as always, is two-time best-selling author, entrepreneur, and CEO of the Masiello Group, Chris Masiello. Chris, how you doing today, man?
Hey, Peyton. Good to be with you. Good to be with everybody in our community. Doing great.
Good. I love to hear that. So today we're actually taking a step back and kind of hitting on some basic macroeconomic concepts here. You had sent me an article recently that kind of talked about the Feds and what they're going to be doing with regards to changing rates. It actually was a Business Insider article that I will link in this post.
It's a good article.
Yeah, it's very, very good. But it got me thinking that a lot of people, sometimes myself, could use a reminder as to what that means. That's something we hear a lot about. You know, the Feds are doing this, they're changing rates again. But what does that mean? How does that impact things like inflation, the economy, all of it, right? How does that all tie together? And I thought hearing that from you could be a really cool way to handle this episode.
It's an interesting topic, of course, timely given where we are. So when the Fed raises rates, the Federal Reserve, it's really the rates that the Federal Reserve charges member banks to borrow money, basically from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, by the way, is not a government entity. It's a government-sponsored entity. It's basically a consortium of large banks that fund the currency. And so, in the last, 10 years or so, we've had very low interest rates. They've ranged anywhere from 0 to 1 or 2%. And so the Fed funds rate, right, which I think is at 5.5 now or something like that, that's the highest it's been in a long time. And some of that just came out of the outgrowth of the great financial crisis back in 2008. And basically what happens is that if you want the economy to expand, you make borrowing money cheap, because then businesses then will be able to borrow money at a lesser cost, and it will create expansion. So obviously it's a lot cheaper to borrow if you're a business, right? It's a lot cheaper to borrow money at 3% than it is at 7 or 8%. And then so the inverse of that is that when the economy overheats and we get inflation, which is what we have now, and I want to put a pin in the inflation piece for a second. And inflation is caused by rising wages, rising prices. In other words, people are consuming a lot, and as people consume a lot of things, the cost kind of goes up, right? And so what the Fed does is they want to in a traditional sense, I'm going to say like post-pandemic, they want to cool down inflation, okay, by raising the cost of money, which in essence slows down the economy, because the cost of borrowing, whether you're a business or a consumer, whether it's a commercial loan to buy new equipment, or whether it's your credit card or car loan, okay, when the cost goes up, it slows down people's ability to buy things. I'm going to unpin the inflation piece, okay? We have inflation today because of the pandemic. That's kind of pure and simple. We have supply chain issues. We still have lingering, labor issues, from the pandemic. We also have got the complication of a ground war in Europe, which again, a pandemic and a ground war, these are 100 years for a pandemic, 80 years for a ground war in Europe, right? These are things we don't see a lot. And the ground war in Europe with Russia and Ukraine has really displaced energy. So Europe had to make a really quick pivot last year from Russian energy to other energy sources. So you have all these like really unique factors that's created inflation that we have today. Now, a year ago, inflation was running at about 8%. Today, last number I saw was about 3.5, 3.7%. So it's come down quite a bit. I don't know if that's really, if that has a lot to do with how the Fed has raised rates. I think it has to do with more that certainly at some level it does, of course. But I think it's really more that people, the world economy is adjusting to these new dynamics we have. In kind of a simple sense, if I have $10 and inflation is at 8% a year, then my $10 really becomes, I lose 80 cents on the dollar, it becomes $9.20, right? So inflation, of course, does eat away at the buying power of the consumer. And so long term, it's not a particularly good thing. I think this window that we're in post-pandemic, I would like to see the Fed slow down on the interest rates. In fact, they meet today. I suspect that they're not going to, the wisdom is that they're not going to raise rates. We're probably done with raising rates. I mean, unless there's some other spike in inflation, but I don't see that. We're probably done raising rates. And then it will be a matter of being in a kind of a holding pattern and seeing what happens with the economy and with what happens, with inflation.
So I saw something recently on the internet that kind of made me laugh. It was people talking about, if inflation's down, why are the cost of goods still so high? And it was kind of a simple thing, but something I hadn't really thought about of, well, we still have inflation. Like our inflation number, like 3% versus like whatever it was, 8%. So costs are still going up, right?
Right.
Do we foresee any time? Because for prices to go back down, we'd have to have negative inflation. Is that a reasonable thing? I was kind of curious after hearing that, and I was curious. I was like, I've never heard of that.
Right. That's called deflation. Let me put it this way: if you have deflation, you've got much bigger problems than prices going up. Okay, it's like you don't want that.
Okay.
So obviously we've had 8%, let's just use that as a number, 8% inflation over the last, 12 months or 18 months. So cost of goods have gone up that much. And so they're going to stay there. The question is, you're going to slow down the rate of them increasing. That's what you're doing. Okay. And typically in kind of really blunt terms, the strategy to slow down inflation is to tank the economy. That is to put the economy into a slight recession. Sometimes it goes deeper than that. But in basic terms, they want to slow down the economy and sometimes put it into recession so that inflation will subside. So instead of being at 8%, maybe it's at 1 or 2%. But in today's world, the Fed target for inflation is 2%. That's probably really unrealistic. I really have not met anybody in any significant financial circle that says 2% is reasonable. Again, post-pandemic, ground war, energy disruption, supply chain disruption, probably 3% is probably the best they're going to get.
So Chris, all of that said, how does this impact housing?
Well, so we went from a pandemic interest rate environment from 3 or 4% to a post-pandemic environment, right? And again, to kind of fight inflation at around 7%. Now, the Fed meets today. They meet every couple months. It's called the Fed Open Market Committee. And there's, I believe, 12 different Federal Reserve districts across the country. So there's 12 different Federal Reserve governors. The consensus is that they'll leave interest rates the way they are. They've been kind of moving them up at like half and quarter point increments, but the thinking is that it'll stay the way it is, probably for this meeting. And there'll be one more meeting by the end of the year, and they'll probably just leave it flat. You'll go into next year, there'll be a meeting, I believe, in February. They'll probably hold it flat there, and kind of a holding pattern to see what happens. Then on the other end of that beginning of the year meeting, I might have my dates off a little bit, but at the beginning of the year meeting, then you'll probably start to see rates come down. I think we're over the top now, where we've plateaued on the rate increases. All things being equal with inflation, and you'll start to see beginning of next year rates come down. But everybody has to remember, though, they only meet every couple months. So interest rates are going to come down at small increments, quarter of a point here, quarter of a point there. So it's going to take a bit to get mortgage rates, for instance, down into that under 5% range. Under 6%. Once we get, and again, the thinking is that once we're under 6%, once we're in the fives, that's going to start bringing people out of this kind of mortgage hibernation environment where, people, the typical thinking like we've talked about here is, you date your rate, but you marry your house, right? Right now, people are married to their interest rates and they're kind of dating their house. And which is we've never really seen that before. Like people don't want to give up their 3% rate for a 7% rate unless they have to. And just parenthetically to that, again, the wisdom is right now is that housing prices are probably the lowest they're going to be in a while. looking forward. And although you might have a higher rate, you want to be in the market now because you're getting into the market before housing appreciation takes off. Because once rates come down, okay, appreciation is going to go through the roof again. You're going to be at 10, 15, 20%. We talked about that last week. So it's going to be a bit before rates come down, but I think we're on the downward slide now. It's just going to be a matter of how long it takes to get there. In which case, we're going to see more inventory because people with those 3% rates or 4% rates won't mind swapping them out for a 5 and a 5.5 because people need bigger houses, or they need to upsize or downsize, right, and all that. So we're kind of in a holding pattern for the time being, I think. Which means when you plateau, you're typically on your downward slide. So I think as far as rates go, I think the top part's over.
That echoes a lot of what we talked about last week, and I think I'm seeing it because we talk a lot, right? But typically when something like this happens, there's a lot of room for opportunity, right? And that's I imagine that's where you're going to take the life lesson part of this, right? That mindful aspect of these episodes.
Yeah, I think that the mindful aspect of it is like we've talked about, that fortune favors the bold. So if you're gonna be in the pool with everybody else, well, you're gonna get what everybody else gets. So the smart play is like Dave Ramsey and other financial analysts have said, and as like industry experts like myself have been saying, now's the time to get into the market. But aside from that, though, I think that there's a lot of wisdom to being educated. Now, like most people who know me, I'm an amateur historian, so I can geek out on economic history and another type of history, right? But I think though that in a general sense, for all of us, certainly listening to a show like this or doing your own research or going on CNBC or Yahoo Finance or any of those things, you can learn about it. And I would really encourage everyone to really understand. You don't have to go too deep, but just become a little educated about this period of time, why we're in it, what does it mean? Because you're going to be able to do your own sense making and then be able to make better financial decisions. And so I think what I'd like to leave everybody with is don't accept the news. Just don't accept the fact interest rates went up. Okay, that's fine. Why? You want to know a little bit of the why, because then that's going to help you make better decisions, for yourself and your family. Because as moms and dads and single parents and all that, right? We're the CEOs of our families. And it's our job to have the information so we can make good decisions.
I love that. But that is going to do it for us on this episode of Change in the Market. Chris, thank you so much for your insights today. For everybody out there, if you like this episode, feel free to comment and like this post or wherever you're seeing this, whether it's YouTube or Instagram. Follow us on TikTok. And otherwise, we'll catch you next week.
See you, babe. See you, everybody. Take care.